Hello, and welcome to Sustainable City Network's presentation of a webcast that will feature the sustainability programs and accomplishments of the city of Las Vegas, Nevada. One of the most water-smart cities in the nation, Las Vegas has decreased its water consumption by 36 billion gallons per year, while adding nearly 500,000 people to its population. In this webinar, Tom Perigo, Deputy Director of Administrative Services and Sustainability Officer for the City of Las Vegas, will provide an overview of the city's sustainability programs and will answer audience questions at the end of this presentation. My name is Dick McGrain, and I'm with Sustainable City Network, publishers of the online trade magazine, scitynetwork.com. Along with webinars like the one you're viewing today, we also produce a weekly email newsletter, a quarterly print magazine, conferences, and other interactive content specifically designed for local government officials who are involved in the day-to-day challenge of building sustainable communities. We reach readers in 50 states and throughout Canada with quality and timely information on sustainability best practices, products, and services. Our presentation today is being sponsored by Crescent Electric Supply Company, and we want to thank them very much for making this webinar possible. We're thrilled to have more than 700 registrants from cities and communities across the nation tuning in today. Now I'd like to introduce our speaker for today's webcast. In his capacity as Sustainability Officer, Tom oversees programs and capital projects that will exceed a 20% reduction in energy use and greenhouse gas emissions, saving over $3 million annually. Tom also has government affairs responsibilities, working closely with state legislators and the Nevada congressional delegation on legislative issues important to the city. In addition, he has responsibility for organizational development, emergency management, and community engagement. Tom serves as a member of Green Chips, a local nonprofit bringing public and private sector organizations together for a sustainable future, and Home Free Nevada, a program dedicated to improving energy efficiency and conservation for residential properties across Nevada. Tom holds a bachelor's in finance from the University of Northern Colorado and a master's in economics from the University of Nevada. So now, without further ado, Tom, take it away.
Well, thank you, Dick, and thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Randy, for inviting me to share the sustainability story about Las Vegas. It's a great opportunity to let people know some of the things we're doing here in the city, because my guess is that most people's perception of Las Vegas is sort of based on images like this one, and there's a reason for that. Las Vegas promotes this kind of imagery, and it's captured again and reinforced in movies and popular culture, and it's extremely valuable to our economy. 40 million people visit Las Vegas annually and spend about $9 billion gambling. And that's only a fraction of the money that tourism brings in. There's a lot of spending on dining and drinking and shows and shopping and entertainment and so on. So that's very important to our community and our economy. And I think it's these images that sort of frames the perception of Las Vegas, known for high-intensity entertainment, gambling, nightlife, bright lights, lavish fountains, sinking pirate ships. And this excess, I think, for many people is seen as being in stark contrast to the fragile desert environment. So this presentation is the story of the Las Vegas that most people, including many who live here, are unfamiliar with. The story of a city that part by necessity and part by choice, we're building a momentum for a sustainable path forward. And these efforts are beginning to pay off, and we'll talk about that in some of the results that we'll share with you. But Las Vegas today is one of the most energy and water efficient economies of any city in the U.S. But get away from the Strip and it's home to 2 million people, and not unlike many other American cities. A professor friend of mine at UNLV commented that he moved to Las Vegas, he realized how routine his life was when the Strip just became sort of a distraction on his daily commute. So away from the Strip, it's like a lot of other cities, but it's also surrounded by a lot of protected federal lands and open space. We have the Red Rock National Conservation Area, the Desert National Wildlife Refuge, Lake Mead National Recreation Area, Spring Mountains National Recreation Area, among others. Las Vegas, with all of this great outdoor opportunity right surrounding the city, is home to a burgeoning population of outdoor enthusiasts and has been a hotspot for rock climbers for decades. But here in Las Vegas, we own who we are and what we are, and we make sustainability a part of our script. Where else can the mayor promote Earth Hour accompanied by showgirls? And it was a great opportunity. The lights on the strip don't go dark very often, but we were able to work with the partners, the strip properties, to take the entire strip dark for Earth Hour for the last 3 years running. That's pretty impressive when you stand back and see the strip go dark. So let's talk a little bit about the city sustainability initiative and how we sort of got the whole thing launched. It really started when the former mayor, Oscar Goodman, signed on to the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement back in 2005, one of the original signers. We took that agreement and turned it into a climate protection resolution that we put before the entire council. We followed that up with a green building resolution that sets standards for city buildings and programs for helping develop momentum for green building in the community, commercial and residential. Adopted the energy code, a wind ordinance, a solar ordinance. It's interesting that in the zoning code there were screening requirements on rooftops that would have cast shadow on solar, so we had to change that. We adopted an urban forestry resolution, and probably the keystone to our entire program is a sustainable energy strategy that was adopted in 2008. In 2010, the Sustainability Office was organized, and a lot of the items in the resolution were incorporated into the conservation element of the city's master plan. So we didn't really put together a sustainability plan, but a series of resolutions, and in those resolutions we embedded targets and goals and objectives that sort of drive the program. So the sustainable energy strategy was sort of the key idea there is to make capital investments in energy conservation and renewable energy, capture the savings to make additional investments. The other key components of that are incorporating the triple bottom line when making decisions on how to invest capital dollars, and taking the long view. A lot of people still think in government agencies that we need to have some sort of a reasonable payback of 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years. But in this resolution and the way we've sort of characterized it in the city is that the city's going to be here for hundreds of years. And the decisions that we make on infrastructure development and capital investments have a long life. And so, for example, if a solar panel is going to generate power for 30 years plus, and it takes 29 years to pay it back, there are other aspects of that investment, when you think about it in terms of the triple bottom line and taking that long view, that bring that sort of investment into focus. So we started with our, as I think many cities did, with the ARA EECBG money, the Energy Efficiency and Conservation Block Grant. We had just over $5 million in block grant money. What we did is leverage that money with tax credit bonds, qualified energy conservation bonds, and new clean renewable energy bonds, city general obligation bonds, utility rebates, and enterprise funds to put together about a $65 million program. And this is at a time, remember, because it wasn't too long ago, and we're not really quite out of the woods yet, but this is a time when our budget numbers were declining rapidly. I think in 2009, 2010, we had dropped back to about a 2002 level of funding. So it was quite a success to be able to compile that amount of funding and do it in a way that actually made good financial sense for the city and hits all of the targets in the triple bottom line. The payback on the city's investment in this entire program is about 8 years, and when you look at all of the funds combined, it's about 13 to 15 years. And keep in mind, many of these assets will be adding value to the city for 15, 20, 30 years or longer. So one part of the sustainable energy strategy was investing in renewable energy. We have solar-covered parking at 30 sites across the city. Even with the rebates, the solar financials were a bit challenging for this program. But as a desert community ideally situated for solar, there's a high expectation that we develop solar projects in the city. The environmental and community arguments when thinking of the triple bottom line are clear: promoting energy efficiency, renewable energy, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, building momentum for renewable energy industry that will create jobs. All of that made sense. But to help make the financial case, we combined solar projects with building retrofits, streetlight retrofits, and modeled the overall payback across all of the investments so that we could leverage all of that low-hanging fruit to do some of those more difficult solar projects. At the time, the solar bids that we were getting were coming in around $10 to $12 a watt, which is pretty expensive, and even with the rebates, it still would drive some of the paybacks beyond the life of the asset. So that's where we got into a little bit of trouble. But again, by combining all of these projects together, we were able to bring the financial picture into focus. If we would have started, for example, changing out streetlights or some of our HVAC or some of our low-hanging fruit in our building retrofits, it would have been really difficult to get to that renewable. And because of those other factors, the community, the economy, and so on, we really wanted to get to that solar. So it turned out to be a pretty successful program. What we did, we were very strategic as to how we put these projects out. We issued RFPs for bid lots of about 4 to 8 sites because we wanted to spread the work out and create capacity in the contracting community. Because remember, at this time also, with the construction industry sort of falling apart, we wanted to make sure that we were keeping projects in the pipeline for some of these contractors to keep them busy, keep their people employed, and make sure that we had competition going forward. And also, quite frankly, to provide the opportunity for contractors to do these kinds of jobs, some of the electrical contractors to build the expertise to do solar. We also built capacity within the organization. These projects and the financing were all very new to the city, so we worked closely with finance, purchasing, public works, construction management, our zoning people, building officials, and our maintenance folks, because they, at the end of the day, they're the ones that inherit all of these systems. And it was very successful. We built through a lot of engagement and a lot of work in these early on projects, we did build a lot of capacity in the city. We now have 3 electricians on staff who are certified as solar installers, and they're starting to do their own projects, which have a very good financial picture. When we can go out and buy our own equipment at $1.50 to $2 a watt and install them ourselves, it becomes very attractive. Right now, they're completing a 50 kilowatt system that will take our emergency operations center to a net zero, and we have 2 fire stations that were certified LEED that only need a 30 kW system to go to net zero, and they're planning, putting together the plans to do those solar systems as well. We do all that in-house, and the payback, the cost per kilowatt hour, is less than what we pay the utility right now. So doing these projects in-house has really been advantageous to building capacity in the organization. And it's really great because now I have a lot of people across the organization coming to me with ideas and requests to do projects at different community centers, fire stations, projects that the folks out in the field come up with. And so that's really starting to build a lot of momentum. We are also very strategic to spread these projects throughout the city, again, to give high visibility. We have solar-covered parking at a lot of parks, a lot of community centers, a lot of fire stations. Again, very highly visible to create that sort of that shift in thinking about renewable energy and to promote renewable energy. Covered parking this time of year in the desert is very valuable. We had to do a little bit of PR work because at that time, again, people are questioning why are we spending money building covered parking when the city's financially strapped. And so we were able to show people that not only do these projects pay for themselves, but they do add that benefit of taking a bunch of asphalt parking and covering it and shading it, which is a huge benefit. So we also installed just over 3 megawatts at the wastewater treatment plant. The city's energy breaks down roughly 1/3 of the energy we use is at wastewater treatment, 1/3 in buildings, and 1/3 in streetlights. So the wastewater treatment plant uses about 1/3 of all the energy that the city uses. The 3.3 megawatt system will provide just over 20% of the power needs at a cost equal to what we were paying the utility for power. We also built blower engines that run off digester gas, and by adding scrubbers and catalytic converters, those have become very efficient, and they're offsetting about 1 megawatt of energy out there as well. So the folks at the plant in a retrofit they're working on have figured out how to reduce the footprint, opening up more land for solar. So right now we're looking at another 3 megawatts and land that we already have. There's a scoping project right now for an additional 2 megawatt system there. So we could potentially get up to 8 megawatts of solar at our wastewater treatment plant within the next 2 to 3 years, which would take us to about 50% renewable energy or more. So the other part of the sustainable energy strategy that was very important are streetlights. City of Las Vegas, we have 52,000 streetlights, and as I said, that's about 1/3 of our energy consumption, about 1/3 of our energy spend. So we were able to put together a program with, this is one that we used a general obligation bond. We actually attached to an issue that they were doing for other purposes, attached the amount we needed to fund this project. We have completed now about 45,000 streetlights conversions. The remaining roughly 7,000 to 10,000 are decorative lights, and so we're still working through looking for product to replace those. Again, the streetlights account for about 1/3 of the city's use, so we were able to cut that bill by about 30 to 50%. So that was a huge benefit for the city. And then, of course, buildings. Buildings, again, about another 1/3 of our energy use. We have about 140 facilities. We performed energy audits on 15 of our highest consuming buildings and performed retrofits that have cut energy by 30% or more. And then that green building resolution required buildings be built to a LEED standard, and that has been a very important part of our mix of our program as well. We've built the Smith Center for Performing Arts, achieved a LEED certification. City Hall just recently received a gold certification. We have, if you can see sort of in the upper left-hand corner, that's the new City Hall, and out front you see those sort of poles with the sort of the flat surface there. Those are solar trees. We have about 77 kilowatt of solar out front, and they're Sanyo bifacial panels, so they produce energy from both sides of the panel. Very efficient, produce quite a bit of energy. On the roof, we have about 90 kilowatts of energy, so solar panels. So we have the City Hall as LEED Gold. We just completed 2 LEED certified fire stations to a gold standard. We retrofitted the historic post office that was a courthouse, and it's the now the Mob Museum, the Museum for Law Enforcement and Organized Crime, and that was retrofitted to a LEED Silver standard as well. And as a historic property, that was very challenging, but it's definitely paying off. We have 2 buildings right now under construction that will receive LEED certification, and all this is contributing to the state of Nevada, which has more square feet of LEED certified buildings per capita than anywhere in the nation, I think with the exception of Washington, D.C. There was legislation put in place about 2 or 3 sessions ago that provided a fairly attractive tax abatement for achieving a LEED standard, and a lot of the major resort properties jumped on that and built some rather large complexes to a LEED standard. And I think one of the buildings is the largest LEED certified building in the country, if not the world. I'm not sure. But anyway, so there was a lot of LEED buildings being developed in Las Vegas. So here's a chart. I just kind of want to show you what it's meant for our energy costs over time. You can kind of see the pattern was peaking about 2009, and then we began doing our improvements. And you can see now, getting into the spring of 2013 at the far right hand of that graph, where the energy consumption has come down quite dramatically. We think our annual energy spend, I think when it peaked in 2009, was $15 or $16 million. We're going to be under $10 million this year. So it's turned out, and that's this fiscal year. So by the end of this month, we'll be under $10 million. And we just opened that 3 megawatt power plant, so we expect next year to be down another $1 million. So here's what our solar generation profile sort of looks like. You can see where that 3 megawatt power plant came online at the wastewater treatment facility in May, really shot up our production. We're looking forward to seeing how this curve continues over the next few years. We have 3, 4, 5 sites under either construction or in the planning stages right now for about another 400 kilowatts of power. And so these are the targets, so some of the targets anyway, that were set in the sustainable energy strategy. The renewable energy target of hitting 7 megawatts by 2015, 3 megawatts by 2011. I'm happy to report to the city manager that we've hit 5 megawatts, just over 5 megawatts here in 2013. Another 2 megawatts in the next couple of years is going to be challenging, but I think we can get there. And while the city manager is pleased, she pushes us pretty hard in this area and expects more. The renewable energy portfolio standard, we set some targets. As you can see, 20% in 2020. We're sitting here at 17% today, and we expect that to go up quite a bit as well. And the carbon footprint reduction that we set, 20% by 2020, we've exceeded that. Today we're at 25%. Now, this is off of a base year of 2008. When we started doing inventories in 2005, we had a lot of difficulty going back and getting data. So we felt that the most reliable information that we have, it really begins in 2008. Even though we started collecting data in 2005, not all of the data we needed was available. So in order to do year-over-year comparison, we base that on 2008. So let's talk a little bit about water. When you think about Las Vegas, think about it as sort of a giant water recycling machine. It's a basin that drains into the Colorado River. Water that goes down the drain in the community is treated and returned to the lake for return flow credits. But the consumptive use, water that's put out for landscaping, is where the big challenge is. Now, we've done a lot to improve conservation through codes and ordinances and programs at the Water Authority, but there's still room for more conservation. We have reduced our consumption in 1990 from 350 gallons per capita per day to less than 225 gallons per capita per day today. Now, that is a good number. I know a lot of cities do a lot better, but keep in mind that also includes the 40 million visitors on the Strip. And just a point of fact, I think it's interesting when we think of Las Vegas, we think about the lavish fountains and the sinking pirate ships and the golf courses and all that water use in the desert. Well, the Strip uses less than 4% of all the water that's consumed in the community. The big user of water is lawns in residential. And you know, the head of the Water Authority has been very aggressive in educating people that you can have a very nice drought-tolerant desert landscaping that looks beautiful that isn't grass. People move here from other parts of the country and they want to bring the kind of landscape they had in the Midwest or Southern California or wherever, and it simply doesn't work here. So we've done a lot to reduce the amount of turf in the residential areas, and that's what's contributing to that $36 billion reduction in water consumption, even while we're adding population over the last 10 years of 500,000 people. So we've done a lot in that area. The city's done a lot as well. We've been removing sport field turf and replacing it with artificial turf. Our water consumption has decreased by 200 million gallons just as a city agency. We've replaced 8 acres of grass turf with synthetic turf, and we've got more projects underway. The city of Las Vegas, and just for some perspective, the city, the corporate entity, is about a third of the total population. Well, about a third of the total population. There's unincorporated Clark County, City of Henderson, City of North Las Vegas. But in the City of Las Vegas, we recycle more than 75 million gallons of water per day. Those golf courses that are out there in the desert, they're being watered by recycled water, and there's very strict guidelines for turf, so the turf is really only in the areas where it's needed, and a lot of the ornamental turf has been removed. So you can see that the city, as a corporate entity, our water consumption is still primarily for in the parks. And again, there's opportunity. We're constantly removing ornamental turf, replacing it with drought-tolerant desert landscaping, and driving more conservation and our water consumption down. Actually, I want to go back one slide, and one thing I want to point out is that you can see our consumption has been cut nearly in half over the last 4 or 5 years, but the water cost has gone up. The connection charges have been very expensive for us with the large water meter, so we're working on that as well. In recycling, we didn't have a very good story to tell for many years. Everything went to the landfill. About a year ago, we hired a consultant to look at how we could improve recycling in the city, and we did a couple of things. One, we right-sized all of our trash capacity. We found that we had pickups coming way too frequently, way too many bins at facilities, so we right-sized that, saving us a lot of money. And we also put in place recycling in all of our facilities now. We're still rolling it out in our parks, in our buildings, but it's been going quite well. When we did the inventory of all of our waste stream, we realized that the majority of everything that goes into waste in city buildings is recyclable, is part of, can be accepted into that single stream recycling facility. So we changed out all of our bins to have recycle bins at all the desks with a very small container for trash, and educated our employees that single stream meant just about everything that goes into the recycling. If it's wet or if it's food, it goes into the trash. Our maintenance folks have barrels now with 2 bins, so they just simply pick up the recycle bin into the one, the trash into the other. And at City Hall, for example, we used to have a giant trash compactor and everything went into that. Now we have a giant recycle compactor and only a very small trash bin. So that's been very successful. Now our annual waste spend was about $800,000 a year. We've cut that down by $300,000 now. We're spending just less than $500,000. And our recycle rate has exceeded 50% this year. Other things that we're working on, downtown, the cycling community is really taking off and becoming very prominent. We're working on striping bike lanes all throughout the downtown. We've been redesigning some of our streets to have be favorable for bus rapid transit. We purchased 4 electric vehicles, and we've installed 20 charging stations at community centers across the city. We have 9 charging stations at City Hall, and the demand is exceeding the supply. The parking manager is bugging me almost daily for more charge stations. One of the interesting things that's happening is the downtown project, the brainchild of Tony Shea and his folks from Zappos, is they've started a car share program, and they're purchasing a bunch of Teslas. So now these Teslas are showing up at our charge stations, and in addition to other people in the downtown who are driving electric vehicles, we don't have enough spaces, so we're adding more charge stations every month. So that takes us to kind of, and I apologize if I'm kind of going fast and at a high level, but I thought that it might be best to get into the details to let the sort of the questions drive the areas of interest in terms of more detail. But so where we're going is this idea towards net zero. Obviously, it's a stretch goal for us, as it is for many cities and many organizations. But one our city manager takes very seriously and is very aggressive and pushing me pretty hard in this area. So we've identified our 4 pillars to get to net zero as being people, power, water, and waste. We know that this requires quite a bit of engagement with the workforce for the city, and a lot of culture change and shift in thinking and understanding about how a city functions and operates, and how we can take the triple bottom line way of looking at investment in projects and programs and how we complete our tasks and taking that long view. So we've been doing a lot of work there. Working with one of our hotel partners, the Caesars Entertainment, we put together a sustainability leaders training program, and it's been incredibly successful. One thing that's been very interesting, well, first of all, we hired a very, very top-notch leadership training group that does mostly large corporate trainings. And when we first approached them, because my counterpart at Caesars was a friend of one of the trainers, they were willing to talk to us. But when we presented the idea of having training with one major corporation and a city organization, very different types of organizations, her immediate response was, no, you guys are nuts, this won't work. But after we talked it through, we said, you know what, let's give this a try. It just might work. And I think at the end of the first training, it exceeded all of our expectations. The value of having people from completely different organizations in their training together and sort of cross-pollinating ideas and so on turned out to be very powerful and one of the real selling points for the program. The thing that people appreciated most, and some of those relationships continue on, some of the facilities people from some of the hotel properties at Caesars are still in contact with some of the facilities people at the city. So it really turned out to be very positive, and the feedback I've received from city employees is that this is the most valuable training they've ever received. And so now we're building in a lot of advocates for sustainability. And what it means for the organization, triple bottom line, the payback on the expense of this training is extremely positive in terms of the way people function and operate and support the sustainability initiative for the city. So when we look at power, you know, we spent, like I said, about $65 million on energy conservation and renewable energy. To get to net zero, I calculate would take about 75 or 100 million. Now that's a big number, but we've already spent 65 million. So with some creative thinking and a little bit of hard work, we feel pretty confident that we can get there. What this chart shows is the goal for renewable energy sort of coming to a meeting point with energy conservation. We think we can drive conservation to reduce power consumption by 40% across our city facilities and deliver about 50% of our power needs through on-site solar. That leaves a bit of a gap, but there are some changes happening with the utility and some opportunities for hydroelectric that we think we can make up that difference. Right now, we're looking at a study of all of our facilities to determine how much on-site solar we can deliver. And we're working with some people on the financing. The pricing we're getting on some of our projects is about $3 to $4 a watt, and under a power purchase agreement or a lease. And when you look at time of use pricing for power, suddenly that price per kilowatt hour comes into focus and is pretty much achieving grid parity. So we feel pretty confident that we'll be able to put out a lot of work here in the next year once we really dial in this model and put all these facilities out for bid. The sort of the case that I make to the elected officials and the city management is, you know, we're never going to get to a point where we don't use power. We can, you know, take conservation to a certain level and we can take renewables to a certain level, but we're always going to be using power. And the question is, do you want to pay a bill to the utility, or do you want to pay for capital improvements and for people? because in order to hit those conservation targets and to maintain those conservation targets, it's going to take people to manage that. And the amount of solar we're talking about putting out, we've already got 30 facilities, and we'll have another 4 or 5 here real soon. Although there's not a lot of maintenance, it does take people to monitor those systems and to make sure that we're producing energy and that we're managing our investment and our assets in such a way that is efficient and financially sound. So all that takes people. So the question is, if we're going to pay for power, do we pay the utility, or do we pay for our own capital investment and for people to manage all of that? And right now, everybody's leaning towards the latter, and so that's a good thing when it comes to hitting a goal of net zero. Other things happening in the state that are of interest: we just finished our legislative session, and there was a bill, Senate Bill 123, that is really interesting. It accelerates our movement away from coal power and completely phases out any use of coal power over the next 10 or 15 years. And I apologize, I don't know the exact timelines because all of that was changing up until the last minute. In fact, the governor just signed it yesterday, and I haven't had a chance to see the final version. But the bill moves us away from coal completely, accelerates the closing of some coal power plants, and in its place, gas-fired power plants, and a considerable amount of solar. I think it's 600 megawatts in the next 5 years, ramping up to 800 or 1,000 megawatts soon. So that will help us in a net zero goal, because a lot of the power coming from the grid will be net zero. At the same time, there was the Hoover power allocation was opened up so that now the city has the opportunity to directly access some of that power. A lot of people assume that the city's power comes from Hoover. That's not necessarily the case. Hoover Dam was developed at a time when the need for power in Southern California for defense industry was very high, so a lot of cities in Southern California directly get that power. And over time, they've invested in the infrastructure to deliver the power, transmission lines, and invested in the upkeep of Hoover Dam. So their ongoing investment needs to be secured by continuing to get the power contracts out of the dam. But there was recent legislation in Congress that allows the city now to get a very small portion, but a meaningful portion for us nonetheless. When it comes to water, as we talked about, our net zero is power, water, and waste. When it comes to water, as I pointed out earlier, there is still a lot of room for conservation in our parks. So we're now performing a comprehensive water resources audit. We have about 2,000 acre-feet of groundwater, so we're looking at how best to deploy those water resources, at the same time maximize conservation and see if there's any possible way to get somewhere close to what would be net zero on water. And when you think about all the water that goes down the drain is recycled, and if we manage those the groundwater resources responsibly so that they're always there and constantly regenerating and constantly being used, we could, interestingly enough, as a desert community, get to something close to net zero. Now, I throw that term around loosely. I understand that because it's not well defined what exactly we mean by net zero. Are we talking about net zero emissions, net zero electricity, net zero water, whatever? And I've talked to a lot of people about that, and I think everybody has a little bit different understanding. There's not one clean definition. So, we're looking at it very loosely and broadly as the resources that we use. There's no sort of net new demand on resources, I guess. Looking at waste, again, as I talked about, we're up to 50% diversion right now, recycling, which we're very happy with. We think we'll get up to 75–80%, and that remaining 20%, we did a study to determine the content of that and its potential to generate energy, and we feel pretty confident within the next 2, 3, 4 years. And I know a lot of people are working on this and way more advanced than we are, so we'll be looking to borrow or steal whatever technologies or ideas are being developed elsewhere. But we think that remaining 20% can be turned into energy or some other product. So we're pretty excited about where we've come to and what we've accomplished, and really excited to have the opportunity to share it with the folks on this webinar today. And that sort of concludes my comments, and I guess now I'd be happy to field questions.
Tom, thanks for an outstanding presentation. We have a lot of great questions coming in, so we'll get right to them. First off, what is your opinion on Bob Beer's proposed bill to move backwards from the ECC 2009 code for existing buildings, and are you involved in this at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate being put on the spot with an elected official who, by the way, serves like as board of directors for operations that affect my job directly. It's a great question. So here on the one hand, we're really working hard to add to this perception of Las Vegas as sustainable. We've really pushed hard to achieve, changes in code, changes in operations, changes in how we invest our capital dollars. And then we have this come up where the issue is the downtown has been developing at a great rate, and the investment is really flowing in, and there's really a lot of exciting things happening in the downtown, this sort of resurgence of activity. And there's concern among some that the energy code, because a lot of those buildings are older buildings, could become a barrier to to development. I haven't really seen evidence of that. Of course, in the world that I work in, most of the people are excited to come downtown because of all of the activity with the green buildings and the sustainability and what's happening, and want to be a part of that, want to be part of that culture, want to be part of that excitement, have their business operate among people that are working and thinking in this way. So I am not too involved. It puts me in an interesting spot where I provide accurate information to the council, and I provide them the benefit of what I know, but ultimately, they are elected to make these decisions, and they're going to have to make that decision. My opinion is that the benefits of compliance with the energy code far outweigh the upfront costs. I mean, we've seen plenty of studies that show that the payback is definitely a benefit to the property owners, and those who have complied that didn't quite understand it afterwards have said that they are very grateful for having gone through that process. I know there's quite a bit of flexibility in how you accomplish that. So in my opinion, it's really about education and working with contractors and property owners and tenants. And I think with or without the code that the market forces will drive energy conservation. So at the end of the day, the codes are important, and they help push us in a certain direction. But I think with the right amount of engagement, that's the direction we're going to go, whether there's a code or not. So I hope I sort of answered it, but I kind of skirted it too, and I apologize. But hopefully you can understand my position.
The next question comes about gray water. Can you kind of expand on that term, and how much is used for irrigation and fountains?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So there was a decision made in this community that we would steer away from the use of gray water, and it has to do with assuring we get the return flow credits into the lake so that we can continue providing water. For example, if we had residential gray water systems, then people might not be as conscious about how they use their landscape irrigation water. So that if we're pumping it all up, we use it in one way, recycle it, use it again. We're not putting anything back in the lake. We reduce those return flow credits. Now, arguably, we're drawing less out to begin with, but my understanding is that the studies that were performed and the thinking from the folks who make policy on that is that it's best not to implement those gray water systems. Now, there's, clearly the energy-water connection is critical and part of the equation, and I'm not convinced that's been completely thought through. I think our spend on energy for water treatment and pumping is about $50 million a year. So if we're treating and pumping less, that energy consumption goes down. Obviously, water is a big input to energy generation, and so the whole cycle goes in a positive way with more gray water. But that's kind of where the current thinking is on policy in the community. Now, we do use, like I said earlier in my presentation, gray water on golf courses and some parks.
Okay, you indicated that the Strip is responsible for 4% of water consumption. Do you know what portion of Las Vegas's energy consumption the Strip is responsible for?
Oh, that's an excellent question, and I don't know. But I can tell you, in my opening comments, I said part by necessity and part by choice. The Strip properties started down the path of energy conservation, water conservation years ago, and out of necessity. It was all about the bottom line. So they have become very, very efficient in their operations, recycling water on site, using groundwater for on-site landscaping. The bright lights are LED. I mean, the major properties have energy managers and sustainability directors, and they're very advanced. So I don't know their portion of the energy consumption, but I do know, based on some work that was done with Brookings Institution and Moody's Analytics, they calculated that Las Vegas uses less energy per unit of gross regional product than most other cities. And when you think about the Strip as the main manufacturing center, and it's being done out of very energy efficient and LEED certified buildings, you can kind of see why that would be the case.
Okay, next question is, are there incentives or de-incentives to golf courses to increase drought-tolerant vegetation?
There's very strict codes. They only get so many square feet of turf per hole. And yes, there is incentive. The Water Authority, in order to remove turf, because remember, that's the real problem in the desert, is watering turf, because that's consumptive use. You don't get that back. And it's unnecessary. So yes, they were paying people, homeowners, businesses, to remove their turf. It was like $1.50 or $2 a square foot. They still have that program. I'm not sure the numbers. It might be $1 or $1.50 a square foot. I know the school that one of my kids went to, I helped them with a project. They took out their turf field in their football stadium and put in artificial turf, and were able to get a large rebate for that. So yes, there are incentives to remove turf, and there are very strict ordinances that restrict how much turf you can put in, either residential, golf course, commercial, and there's a restriction on fountains too, unless it's an important, there's some way to determine whether or not the fountain is part of the economic activity of the business or whatever. So a lot of fountains around town that were just like ornamental in front of a business park or whatever were shut down.
Okay, our next question comes from Nina, and she would like to know, is there any composting going on at the hotels and restaurants?
Yes. North of town there is a pig farm, and so maybe it's not necessarily composting in the strict terms, but a lot of the waste food product feeds the pigs out at the pig farm.
All right. Where did the drive to sustainability start? Did it start with City Hall and the Council, or come from the city's consultants or constituents?
That's a good question. Yeah, the drive for the organization started really with the mayor and the city management at the time, and at the same time there was a strong drive developing population that were involved with the U.S. Green Building Council, architects and trades and so on, and various different industries and groups that were pushing in this direction. And like I said, a lot of the hotels were developing offices for this as well. And recognizing that, we started the nonprofit organization you mentioned in the opening called Green Chips, which started to bring all of these groups together so that if we individually have targets for sustainability for our organization, how do those feed into making this community more sustainable? And so we have an annual meeting called Convene for Green, where we set pillars and targets for achieving sustainability. And this organization, Green Chips, is really unique in that you have very strong buy-in from the public and private sector, covering all of the major employers in the community. And so they're making some pretty good progress.
Excellent. So the next question comes from Seth, and he would like to know, what was the budget for training and what did it buy for you?
Good question. So the I think we paid about $1,200 a person for 3-day leadership training, and I've put now 65 people through that in the last like 18 months. And the money came from, we established a green building special revenue fund. What we did is we took a fraction, a small percentage of any increase in franchise fees for power, power, gas, and trash, and put that into this green building fund. Unfortunately, we created the fund, and the next year the floor fell out of the economy, and we haven't received one penny from that yet. But we were able to put into that fund rebates and other funding sources that we've been able to sort of keep going and use for projects like this. So we don't. So it gives us a lot of flexibility to do some of these more creative type of programs. We have sort of this built-in funding source.
Okay. You talked about removing ornamental turf in parks and changing sports fields to artificial turf, but what about neighborhood parks and that are multi-purpose centers? Are these converted to artificial turf also?
Well, you know, the real drive working with the landscape architects and the water authority and other people, professionals in the community, is put turf, you know, it's not that we're going to eliminate all of the turf. So in the neighborhood parks, we definitely have turf, but make sure we have turf where it's used and needed. So for example, if you have landscaping around the perimeter, that's not really usable turf, so maybe that would be better with some shrubs, some drought-tolerant shrubs and plants and so on. So yes, we have turf in neighborhood parks, and we have turf where it's needed, so people can, you know, go run the dog or throw the frisbee or whatever. But you know, the landscaping in the parking lots, or you'd be surprised how much turf is out there that really doesn't add anything to the experience.
Okay. Can you explain more about your power purchase agreement and its pros and cons?
Well, we are just now doing our first power purchase agreement. We're in the process of, well, we just completed negotiating the contract, and it goes to council next week. So until that's approved, I don't know how much I can say, but you know, we have, it's a 100 kW system, and we have a rebate from the utility, and so we'll pay a prepaid energy charge with that rebate that will cover our cost of power for 5 years. So essentially, for the first 5 years, the city will be out of pocket no money. It will cost us nothing. At the end of that 5 years, we'll have about $170,000 left in that prepaid energy charge bank, or whatever you want to call it. And so that then, per the contract, can be used to buy the system outright. And most people are probably familiar with the power purchase agreement. You can't determine the value in advance per IRS rules, but at any point in the future, you can, on a price that's agreed to by the parties or a third-party determination of the market value, you can buy the system. And we ran the calculations and looked at per the contract terms of the price for energy over the remaining life of the contract at 5 years in the net present value, and a number of ways that we've calculated it comes out to be roughly the remaining amount of that prepaid power. So in this particular case, it looks like we may get the entire system for the cost of the rebate and never spend a dime of the city's money. Now, going forward, we won't have rebates to do, the next 2 or 3 megawatts that we're working on right now. But through a similar arrangement where I'm looking at borrowing that prepaid energy and figuring out what that amount would need to be to have something so that at the end of 5 years, once the investment tax credit's been taken by the owner and the asset's fully depreciated, what would be that, in rough terms, projecting what that buyout amount would be and what that prepaid energy charge needs to be, and looking at creative ways to finance that prepaid energy. And I think some of the rough calculations I've done will easily get within a price per kilowatt hour that's equal to what we're paying on the grid. And mind you, that's locking in today's rate for the next 30 years, which is a pretty favorable deal.
Okay, the next question comes from Andrew, and it was mentioned the pursuit by the City of Las Vegas for the construction of LEED certified government buildings. In terms of the overall efficiency and sustainability of the city, how has Las Vegas incorporated LED-ND neighborhood design standards?
Yeah, that's a good question. In our planning department, when a project comes through, we have a checklist that's based roughly on LEED ND, and we walk applicants through that checklist and do things to encourage them to achieve LEED ND. Although we really don't have any incentives and there's really no teeth, so it's more of an educational thing right now. But in our downtown, there's a large property that used to be the railroad property that we've reclaimed, and the entire area is planned and achieved a LEED ND for the plan, and it's going to be developed that way. Every project that goes in is a LEED building, and the whole design would achieve a LEED ND.
There's a person who would like to know more about bike share in your community.
Yeah, we are working with the downtown project that I mentioned earlier and the RTC on a bike share program. We started down one path, sort of backed up, started down another path, but I think they've figured out the formula. I took a step away from that because the last 4 months I've been engaged with our legislature, but I know that group's moving forward, and within the next 6 to 8 months, I think we'll have our bike share program up and running with our car share program that's going to have a bunch of Teslas and a bunch of bikes, and it's pretty exciting.
Well, it looks like we've run out of time, so if we didn't have a chance to get to your particular question, don't worry. We'll follow up with an email in the next few days. You'll also have an opportunity to submit any additional questions in a brief survey that will pop up at the conclusion of this webcast. We would like to thank Crescent Electric Supply Company for their sponsorship of this webinar. We certainly couldn't have done it without their support. And Tom, once again, I'd like to thank you for an excellent presentation.
Thank you, Dick.
Okay, that'll do it. Thank you, everyone, and have a great Thursday.